Accused child killer David was back in court for a very important hearing because we just got confirmation on what is going to happen next in this murder case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. By the way, if you're putting things out on social media, if you're into content creation, you might be wondering, how do we share all these clips on these rapidly developing stories so quickly? Well, we use something called Opus Clip. Opus Clip is an all-in-one AI editor that makes it a breeze to cut, create, and upload videos across any platform. Through AI, Opus Clip generates B-roll, it reframes footage, and it even cleans up audio. Using Opus Clip is so easy. You just visit opus.pro/sidebar. You sign up, you upload it. In minutes, you'll have perfectly edited clips ready to go. For TikTok, Shorts, Reels, Opus Clip is really your one-stop shop. And having a tool like Opus Clip means that our producers can get you viral courtroom updates instantly. This is the most powerful tool there is to share ideas and edit like a pro. So go to opus.pro/sidebar to get a free week and then 50% off. Okay, July 7th, 2026, we got this brand new hearing that just happened in the David case. I'm going to be bringing on a reporter in a little bit who was in there. We'll give a play-by-play of what happened, how David looked, how he acted, what we can expect next. Two things. First, I'm going to give you context. And two, I got a very interesting update in this case. It just came down. So let's first start here. David. David is the romantic homicide singer currently charged with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains, all in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Prosecutors allege that he was in a sexual relationship with her, that back on April 23rd, 2025, David allegedly lured her to his rental home in LA, stabbed her to death, allegedly watched her bleed out, and then reportedly took horrifying measures to conceal this alleged crime. All in an effort, according to prosecutors, to keep Celeste quiet about their relationship, to prevent her from coming forward, to prevent her from ruining his lucrative career. The special circumstances allegations in this case that carry heftier penalties, potentially the death penalty, murder of a witness, murder for financial gain, lying in wait, that he allegedly used a deadly and dangerous weapon, a sharp instrument. Prosecutors allege he purchased a blue inflatable pool, chainsaws, a body bag, heavy-duty laundry bags, that he dismembered her body, that he allegedly made suspicious trips to the Santa Barbara County area, that he purportedly lied to friends and associates about the alleged smell of decomposition in his place. And then you go to September 8th, 2025. This is the day after what would have been Celeste's 15th birthday. Her dismembered, decomposed body is found reportedly in the front trunk of a Tesla, allegedly registered to David at an LA tow yard. At the tow yard, LAPD detectives opened the Tesla's front storage compartment and reportedly find this black cadaver bag that is covered in insects. And inside the bag, authorities claim they discovered a severely decomposed head and torso. A plastic garbage bag beneath the black cadaver bag reportedly contained the dismembered arms and legs. Now, Celeste's ring and pinky fingers on her left hand had reportedly been amputated. They weren't found in the Tesla. And this is a level of graphic detail that has just led to a very interesting development in this case. This is new. So before I even talk about what happened in court today, NBC News has reported that more than a dozen employees of the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office are under investigation for allegedly viewing law enforcement investigation files without the appropriate authorization. So the release of details of Celeste's death before the autopsy was published for the whole world to see, that may have started this. The outlet reports that the Celeste case may have prompted this probe by the Human Resources Department. Now, neither the ME's office nor the union representing the office's investigators has issued a comment at the time of this recording, other than this union saying, quote, "We expect the county to conduct any investigation professionally, fairly, and without prejudice. We encourage others to allow the process to run its course before making conclusions." The union that represents other staff members of the ME's office wrote, quote, "We can say unequivocally that our union remains firmly committed to safeguarding the privacy of all victims. Patient privacy is an issue we take seriously, especially because so many of our union members work in healthcare and interact with patients either directly or indirectly." Now, let me just tell you why this is so interesting, because it was reported that the LAPD Robbery Homicide Division, which is leading this investigation into Celeste's death, had asked the ME's office at one point in time not to release Celeste's records, and that the ME's office reportedly refused, citing, quote, insufficient jurisdiction. Now, what happened? November 21st, 2025, the court ordered that the LAPD medical examiner's report and information about Celeste's death be sealed, that a security hold was placed to prevent any information from reaching the media. The ME's office came out with a statement saying, at the time, at 10:54 a.m. on Friday, November 21st, the County of Los Angeles Department of Medical Examiner received a court order initiated by the Los Angeles Police Department to place a security hold on medical examiner case number 2025-14252, Celeste Rivas Hernandez. No records or details associated with the case, including the cause and manner of death and medical examiner report, can be released or posted on the website until further notice. The chief medical examiner, Dr. Ode Ukpo, is quoted in a press release saying the following at the time. Quote, the department's mission is to have full transparency with the community by providing information about our cases to empower people to make changes that save lives. Since becoming the department head, I've worked on eradicating the practice of placing security holds on medical examiner cases simply by law enforcement request. The practice of security holds is virtually unheard of in other counties and has not been proven to improve outcomes in the legal system. We are dedicated to serving our community with full transparency. However, the law precludes us from doing so while the court order remains in this case. By the way, LAPD robbery homicide issued a statement at the time saying in part, quote, the LAPD sought to seal the records of the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's investigation into Celeste Rivas' death. That order was sought only to ensure detectives from the robbery homicide division learned of important information surrounding her death before the media and the public. The order was not sought to undermine transparency. Then on April 22nd, 2026, the ME report was released, and Dr. Ukpo said this, quote, after several months, I am grateful this information can now be released not only to the public, but also to the grieving family enduring loss. It is unfathomable they have had to wait this long to learn what happened to their daughter. I just had to put that into context as we make sense of this. And by the way, what was found? The medical examination for Celeste was completed on December 9th, 2025, and the results were released after David's arrest. The findings in part, I'm going to read verbatim from the summary portion. Quote, autopsy examination was limited by extensive post-mortem changes. There are 2 penetrating wounds of the torso with smooth edges that may represent sharp force injuries. The wound on the upper abdomen penetrates the liver, and the wound on the left chest penetrates one of the left intercostal spaces with disruption of the adjacent ribs' cortical surfaces. The left lung appears intact. The bilateral upper and lower extremities show full thickness dismemberment. Multiple other skin and soft tissue defects are present without apparent associated internal injuries. The etiology of these defects is not clearly apparent due to severe post-mortem changes. Post-mortem toxicology performed on liver tissue shows the presence of a low level of ethanol, which may be due to post-mortem changes or ingestion and does not appear to be contributory to the cause of death. Given the history and circumstances as currently known by me in the setting of the findings by examination, ancillary studies, and in the absence of other definitive causes of death, the cause of death is multiple penetrating injuries. The manner of death is classified as homicide. That's where we're at. All right, so what is going on as we head into the David hearing today? What happened in court? You know who I'm bringing in. I'm so happy to have her back. Our eyes, our ears for what happens in this Los Angeles courtroom. NBC LA reporter Julia Deng is back with us. Julia, thank you so much for coming on. I have a lot to get through with you, but first, whenever we have a hearing and wherever we don't have cameras in there, I got to ask, how did David look? How did he look? How did he act? Let's start there.
Hey there, Jesse. I love that you open with that question. I think every time we talk, he didn't look great. I mean, he had longer hair. He was unshaven. He came in wearing his regulation LA County jail uniform, that orange jumpsuit with a white shirt inside. But he was very engaged, totally present, sat down, made eye contact with the judge. And they even exchanged a bit of small talk. He said good morning. He was smiling. And here's the major update. It's not that David isn't looking great or that his defense attorneys are still stalling for more time as part of their strategy. The significant update today following the status conference is that this case is actually moving forward. This is now our 3rd status conference in this David case that we're chatting about. The last 2, as you recall, deja vu, because we've done this now a couple times. they were both continued, meaning the case was essentially delayed during those last two status conferences in May and in June. Well, this time, we all came in expecting this case to be continued, again, to essentially be delayed one more time. But no, they're moving forward. This is actually going to a preliminary hearing now, and that is set to start on Tuesday, July 21st, so 2 weeks from today. And Jesse, it was just a very different kind of atmosphere today, different energy. As soon as I walked in, I noted on defense and prosecution, it felt like they were kind of on the same page. They both understood. I think this case was finally going to move forward. So the judge closed by, chatting with them about how water and coffee would be allowed in the courtroom moving forward. She made a joke about how we're going to be here for the long haul. So again, preliminary hearing starting Tuesday, July 21st. And they've mapped out, dates for the next 2 weeks in case that hearing takes more time. So Tuesday, the 21st, Wednesday, the 23rd, Thursday, the 24th, Friday, the 25th, and this could drag on into the following week, especially as they get into evidentiary hearings, because we know there is a lot of evidence, especially a lot of digital data that was transmitted to the defense attorneys as part of discovery.
Let's take a step back here. So I looked at some of the notes here. They set up actual times when court would start for all of those days. A preliminary hearing in this case is significant because that is when the prosecution will have the opportunity to present their case. Now, not all of their case. They have to present sufficient evidence to establish probable cause, sufficient evidence that there is probable cause David committed or allegedly committed these crimes to convince the court there is enough to go forward with an actual trial. Now, this is in front of the judge. This is in front of the court. There's no jury here. It's a low standard, right? It's a low bar. By all accounts, the prosecution, from what we've seen, will have sufficient evidence for this case to move forward. But it does give the opportunity for the defense to challenge the evidence, to see what the prosecution has, kind of a preview of where they may go with the trial. But I want to just take a step back here before we even talk about next steps with this. Was there anybody on David's side? Were there any friends? Were there any family? Was Celeste's family there? Who else was in the courtroom today?
Again, Jesse, just like the last two status conferences we've covered, we didn't see any supporters, any friends, any family for either side, David or his alleged victim. It was primarily just media. There was a deputy DA sitting in the jury box. There was a sketch artist in there. But the different energy this time, I think, stemmed from the fact that defense and prosecution were both ready to move forward finally toward this preliminary hearing. And I'm curious as to what part of that evidence, the voluminous evidence in this case, the defense is ultimately going to challenge. Now, the defense attorney did say that, according to the DA, in this case, they have all the evidence that is relevant to the preliminary hearings that they were supposed to receive as a part of discovery when they're sharing evidence between the two sides. They did say they requested chronologies from detectives. They're still working on getting that. But again, it is significant that every piece of evidence deemed relevant to these preliminary hearings has now been shared. So the defense now has what they need to start building this case for them to move forward.
What about witnesses? I saw there was some discussion today about witnesses, how they may testify, how they may be presented in court. Talk to us about that.
So we have not seen any kind of witness list just yet. I know, Jesse, you and I have chatted about that a couple times, wondering who might ultimately be called to the stand in this case. I know there were questions, a lot of chatter online about members of David's family who might ultimately be called to testify. So we didn't see a witness list. There was chatter this morning during this hearing, however, about exactly where those witnesses might be seated at the counsel table, the benches of lawyers in front of the judge in this courtroom. So there was some back and forth just clarifying, how many people can be seated at that table? Where exactly are they going to sit. It sounds like defense attorneys want to make sure, they have enough contacts to make sure their witnesses are comfortable testifying. Of course, they're all coming in. I don't want to say coached, but prepared. They're all coming in understanding just how high the stakes are here, what David could be facing. Because again, he's not charged with only murder. It's murder and 2 additional felonies on top of that, mutilation of a corpse and continuous sexual abuse of a child.
It's interesting because we have this conversation in an actual trial. When can witnesses be in court, right? Because you don't want them sitting through testimony before they testify, because that could influence what they ultimately say. So there is some, safeguards put in place here. Preliminary hearing, very different, right? The rules of evidence are different. The standard is different. We understood that the defense has a defense investigator. Did that come out today? The defense maybe has a defense investigator?
That did come out, and there was a question about where that defense investigator can actually sit. It sounds like they've got 2 chairs at the defense counsel table in front of the judge. Obviously, there's 1 chair for David. He was seated right on the end of the table today. I was basically catty corner facing the front of the court on his right-hand side. So I had a clear view of him in profile looking at the judge. But yeah, the defense investigator might be seated right next to David or his lead defense attorney. So yes, that is somebody we likely will hear from now that we know this is going to a preliminary hearing and evidentiary hearings. But here's the question. Is this actually going to trial? We haven't heard anything about a potential plea deal, but we still need to get through these preliminary hearings for a trial date to formally be set.
First of all, a couple things, right? A defense investigator would be interesting, maybe present an alternative theory of the case, weaknesses in the prosecution's case. But do we know anything more about the death penalty, whether or not prosecutors are moving forward with that? I know there's a moratorium on executions in California, but you always wonder if that's an incentive for a defendant to plead guilty, so it's taken off the table. Any word on that?
No additional updates on that today, but I can tell you what the status of that is overall in this case. In California, yes, there is a moratorium on executions. Governor Gavin Newsom halted those, I believe, back in 2019. But in this case, because there are special circumstances as part of this first-degree murder charge against David, he actually is eligible for the death penalty. So they could ultimately seek that if he's convicted. And of course, with executions halted, he would immediately be put to death. But this is still considered a capital case, first-degree murder with special circumstances.
Julia, what about this protective order that I understand something was put in place today by the court?
Yeah, that was interesting. This conversation started actually months ago, and there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of debate between defense and prosecution about how to protect parties involved in this ongoing case. So apparently, prosecution sent back a revised draft of what they thought would be an acceptable protective order back in May. And they haven't been able to agree upon anything until today. So defense attorneys came back and said, they've reached a conclusion about what they felt like they needed. That was submitted to the court today. And it sounds like the judge signed off on those protective orders at the end of the hearing. That bit might have actually been off the record. That was not something they shared in open court with most media present. But they did state that they've agreed upon what they need in protective orders. They did not say who it covers, but we can guess there might be people on the witness list who are covered by those protective orders.
And particularly in a case this high profile, where you already have a question about jury selection, it's not surprising that you see these orders being put in place to preserve information coming out. What about grand jury transcripts? So I understand there was a conversation about that too, and that's interesting because that's part of a larger conversation we've had in this case, right? This was not an indictment through a grand jury. This is trying to move forward through a preliminary hearing, right? There's 2 ways for this case to progress. And our understanding is there's been several grand juries that have been impaneled this case, maybe to evaluate evidence, but We don't know if whether or not these were grand juries that had the power to indict or not, but there has been no grand jury indictment, right? There's been no official charging of him through a grand jury, but it seems the defense is interested in transcripts of what happened at these proceedings.
That should be something shared during the discovery process. And you're right, Jesse. I think there have been way more questions than answers when it comes to that piece of this murder investigation. There was no grand jury indictment, and we really don't know what went down as a part of that process. So they had questions just about the logistics of how they were going to get those transcripts. That sounds like, are they getting recordings? Are they getting a stack of papers with printed transcripts? Are they getting a digital file download? And the prosecution and judge responded that they would actually go through the grand jury for that. But once defense attorneys get their hands on that data, however it may be coming through, you can bet bits and pieces of that relevant to their case, relevant to their defense, will start making their way, I think, to media.
And by the way, typically defense attorneys would try to strike a grand jury indictment or grand jury proceedings by saying, look, the prosecution deliberately withheld exculpatory evidence, right? Evidence tending to show a defendant is not guilty, or they misrepresented certain facts to the grand jury. Just some things to look out for. I want to go back to something that you mentioned, and I want to clarify. You talked about maybe we might have a number of hearings, maybe leading up to the preliminary hearing or having the preliminary hearing and evidentiary hearings. So timeline-wise, is there anything going to happen between now and this preliminary hearing in 2 weeks? You said that maybe they're scheduling several days for this preliminary hearing. What are we looking for next?
So let me clarify this for anybody who may be following this case without legal background, which I think is most of our audience. I mean, this has generated so much interest. Many fans who previously followed David's music and had awareness of this girl, this child, Celeste, who was seen in his live streams, they're following this too. So just to be clear, it is one preliminary hearing, but because there's so much that has to be parsed through during that hearing, it will likely take more than one day. It's not going to be like these quick blips, these status conferences. Each of these have lasted no more than 30 minutes. I mean, last time we were in the courtroom for about 4 minutes total. So this preliminary hearing could stretch out across 2 weeks. And as a part of that, there could be evidentiary hearings. And because there is so much evidence, I think the judge preemptively wanted to carve out enough time on her calendar and on the attorney's calendars to ensure that what they start, they finish. And the important thing when they do finish this multi-day preliminary hearing will be whether or not this ends up going to trial and when that trial is going to start. But again, major update today, significant piece coming out of this is that, all the evidence relevant to this preliminary hearing has now been shared with defense attorneys. They've acknowledged that, and they are now saying they are ready to move forward. Just this morning, we were talking about this could be delayed again. This could go on for maybe a year. That can happen. That can be a strategic move on the part of defense attorneys. But this is speeding forward now.
And look, this is an opportunity for the defense to challenge the prosecution's evidence, because it's one thing what the prosecution alleges that they have in their filings. Now they're going to actually show it, whether it's surveillance footage or text messages or forensic data or witness testimony. This is the opportunity. This is something we have all been waiting for since September of 2025. And let's be clear also, David is innocent unless proven guilty. Before I let you go, I got to ask you about this update. I mentioned it before. So NBC News has reported that more than a dozen employees of the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office are under investigation for allegedly viewing law enforcement files without the appropriate specific authorization. That it might have been the Celeste Rivas Hernandez's case, that ignited all this. You are somebody who is in LA, the interplay between the medical examiner's office and the LAPD. Do you have any more information about this? Because it feels like a pretty significant development.
innocent until proven guilty. We don't actually know what this investigation is going to lead to. We don't know for sure. I know the agency hasn't said if this actually did come to light because of the Celeste case, but there have been details. There have been bits of information floating around online, and we don't know where they came from. So hopefully we get more information when this investigation wraps up. But I do know Eric Leonard, investigative reporter at NBC4 LA, reported this yesterday. And I think it's just more noise around this case. There's so much buzz. There is so much interest. I think you recall after the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash and investigation, right? That was an issue as well. There were allegations of people improperly sharing things they had access to. So curious to see what comes of that. And then, of course, what is relevant in courts is whether that impacts the case at all, and whether that's a thread that either the defense or the prosecution can pull on. Because you know this as well as anybody, Jesse. Anything that is not handled the right way, anything that's not up to par, could lead to the integrity of the case really being, really being contaminated.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it seemed like during the course of this investigation, there was a bit of tension between the medical examiner's office and the LAPD. Is that something you've seen in your experience? Is there a little bit of friction between them?
I haven't seen anything.
Okay.
I've heard a lot of things. I think we all have. What I have questions about here is not so much this rumored rift between the LA County Medical Examiner's Office and the LAPD. I'm curious about the LAPD, the City Police Department, not being on the same page as the LA County District Attorney's Office. We've talked about this before, how days went by between the arrest of the defendant here and actual charges being filed. So different agencies, different roles. And yes, there are questions about these different agencies not really being on the same page. This is interesting too. These are investigative bodies. But I want to point out what the defense, what reps for David's team said very early on when they said he was cooperating with LAPD. That was another example of parties not really being on the same page and messaging not really being aligned. Because an LAPD captain came out later on and said, no, we didn't authorize that statement. We didn't have awareness of it. And come to find out, this is the man now charged in this case. I don't believe he was cooperating with them at any point in the way that his team may have said. So a lot of different parties, a lot of different motivations. And I think in this courtroom, we'll see how all of this shakes out. Who's got the strongest case?
Well, you are going to be in there. I would love for you to come back on when the preliminary hearing happens and potentially over the course of several days, because that is the key. That is the key in seeing what evidence the prosecutors claim they have against David in this case. So Julia Deng, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Excellent reporting as always.
We'll be back.
Really, really appreciate you. Great.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. See you next time, everybody.